Hi there, and welcome to Fuzzy on the Details. My name is Fuzzy, and if you're into the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game, you've come to the right place. Today, we're going to be discussing my approach for creating builds of well-established Marvel characters, including those that aren't in the game just yet. And there's no better way to do that than by tackling the most iconic Marvel character that isn't yet in the game, one of my favorites since I was a kid, Francis Castiglione himself, the Punisher. But if you're not a Punisher fan, don't worry. The same advice can be applied to building a rank 3 Daredevil or an MCU-accurate Deadpool that has some ranged weapon powers. We're going to show you how you can channel your love for a particular character into a build that's the most fun to play for you, while still feeling extremely faithful to the source material. When you've got a character like Frank Castle with over 50 years of comic book appearances, the foundation to success is to narrow your build concept down. All Marvel characters go through changes over the years, and sometimes those changes can be contradictory. So when you're thinking about your build concept, I recommend you zero in on an era. You could choose a particular author's run on the comics, or in the case of the Punisher, one of the 3 movies or 2 Netflix seasons he's had. Think about the individual comics you've gone back to reread multiple times, or the scenes in movies or TV shows that you love to go back and rewatch. Those moments that bring a smile to your face when you're reading them are going to be just as enjoyable to play with a D616 in hand. But it's important to think about what you don't want to incorporate as well. Just because something happened in the comics doesn't mean you have to put it in your build. For example, I wasn't really a fan of the runs where the Punisher was Frankencastle, or was resurrected by angels, or was in charge of the hand and the fist for the beast. So we're going to stay away from those stories that have these more fantastical and less grounded elements. For me, I really love the Chuck Dixon, John Romita Jr. run from the original Punisher Warzone, as well as more recently the Greg Rucka, Marco Cacchetto run from the 2011 Punisher series. And I really love John Bernthal as the Punisher, but I'd rather just focus on these comics for this particular build. The first thing we need to think about is rank. The benchmarks from the core rulebook are a great starting point. And one way to consider rank is to think about the geographic range of a character. Do they protect a city, a neighborhood, or are they a national hero? I want to make sure I stick as closely as I can to the comic runs I've identified as my inspiration, so it's time to do some research. And by research, I mean just rereading some of my favorite comic books for the umpteenth time. Skimming the first couple issues of Punisher Warzone, I can see a reference to Brooklyn, New York on the first page of issue 1. He's in the Bronx by the first page of issue 2, and then he's in Queens shortly thereafter. So that's 3 of the 5 boroughs of New York City in the first 2 issues. Definitely more than just a neighborhood hero. By issue 3, he's in New Jersey and Long Island, and by issue 5, he's in the Yucatan. Rucka's run is similar. He starts off in New York City, then he extends north to the Hudson River Valley, which is about an hour or 2 away from the city, and then he's on a yacht off of Long Island, and then he's back to Wall Street in Manhattan. So in both of these stories, the Punisher clearly focuses on the 5 boroughs of New York City, plus the outlying areas like Long Island or New Jersey. He does travel outside of these borders when necessary, but he's clearly rooted in New York City. To me, that puts him well above the rank 2 protects a neighborhood territory and into rank 3. Now, if you intend to play this character, it's really important that you share this information with your narrator and your fellow players. Simply stating, hey, my favorite Punisher stories are the ones where he's based out of New York City. A little travel outside of the area in the name of justice is fine, but the city is really where this character's roots are. That's just going to help your narrator create stories that you're going to find mesh well with your character. Another thing you can do when considering rank is to compare your build with other published characters in the game. So for me, I took a look at Crossbones and Paladin here. And there's no way I can play a Punisher that's a lower rank than either of these 2 guys. So rank 3 it is. On the other hand, you could also compare the Punisher to Daredevil since they show up together a lot. But I would use this more of an argument to raise Daredevil to a 3 than maybe to drag the Punisher down to a 2. I like to save ability scores for last, so once we've locked in rank, let's move on to biography, which I think is going to be pretty straightforward. For me, origin is obviously special training. Yes, there are other stories where you could create a Punisher war machine and give him the tech origin, or the Hand of the Beast Punisher and give him some kind of magic origin, but again, those aren't the stories we're focusing on, so we're going to just stick with special training. And for occupation, military. These stories in particular refer to the skills he employs on his crusade as being the ones he learned as a Marine. Yes, he may be considered a criminal, but he refers to himself as a soldier in a war in these comics, and he acts accordingly. For other builds, you could go criminal or even assassin, but for this build, we're focusing on Frank as the ex-Marine, or the Marine as he would look at himself. Let's go to tags. We're definitely going to give him black market access, because in these stories he gets his hands on some extremely illegal weaponry. In both of these comic book runs, Frank has a home base that he works out of, so giving him headquarters definitely makes sense. We're going to give him hunted for sure. In fact, some of the police officers that are hunting him are major characters in these stories. And definitely streetwise. In fact, he's so good at this, he's able to successfully go undercover as a criminal in both of these runs. Of course, I don't think there's any way he gets heroic, but he's definitely not villainous. Let's move on to traits. Frank feels like a one-man army in these stories, so for me, giving him extra reactions is important. Combat reflexes could allow him to use certain powers as reactions to do some extra damage outside of his standard action. So let's keep that in mind when we're choosing powers. Interrogation is a must for me because these stories, like so many, involve Frank Castle working his way up the hierarchy of a criminal organization through, let's say, advanced interrogation techniques. And of course, there's the absolutely classic interrogation scene from Punisher Warzone, which was used in the Thomas Jane movie. For me, one of the most iconic things about the Punisher in these runs is his ability to take out a room full of bad guys, usually with an automatic weapon in each hand and bullet casings flying all over the place. It's his go-to move for sure, his signature attack, if you will. For me, that image of Frank screaming with twin guns blazing is Orchestra of Overkill, and if anyone in this game should have that power, it's Frank. Now the problem is, that's a rank 4 power, so we'll need to take the surprising power trait to get it, and if we want to make it our signature attack, that's another trait that we don't have. And I don't want to give up interrogation or combat reflexes, so we're going to have to sacrifice a power slot to get that extra trait, but to me, it's worth it. Speaking of powers, let's segue to those. First things first, let's mark off that extra trait. Next, we need to take 8 powers to get Orchestra of Overkill. Point blank parry, snap shooting, fast hands, weapons blazing, slow motion dodge, which is in the basic set, slow motion shoot dodge, dance of death, and then finally Orchestra of Overkill. That eats up a lot of our power slots, but to me, this is what the build is all about, so I'm going to do it. I think it's essential. And all of these other powers here are very on point for Frank. Point blank parry gives us that opportunity to do some damage with a reaction, as we discussed when taking combat reflexes. That's great. And fast hands gives him another reaction. Now, to take advantage of these reactions, he needs to be up close and personal with his foes. But in these stories, that's just how he likes it. He's always right up on top of his enemies as he's taking them out. I really like this selection of powers here that leads up to Orchestra of Overkill. Another iconic characteristic of the Punisher is his pinpoint accuracy, even when firing upon multiple enemies at once. He's so accurate that even the police that are hunting him bring it up at crime scenes. Part of me wants to give him accuracy 3, but we'll respect the fact that Bullseye and Hawkeye both only have accuracy 2, and we'll keep it at that, at least for now. Now let's take a look at his hand-to-hand skills. Yes, in both of these stories, the Punisher fights with a knife. In this battle with an alternate version of the Vulture, he's using brute force to do so. He's not exactly an artiste with the blade. There are several other battles where he's using a knife as well. But again, he's not really the Winter Soldier flipping it around and executing sweet moves. He's almost taking savage swings, relying on his strength more so than technique. And of course, the Punisher can also fight barehanded. And we know from his wiki, for example, that he knows several martial arts. But again, in the scuffles he gets into in these comics, he's not using martial arts. He's just overpowering his foes with his immense size and strength. He might smash people's faces into walls or even slamming them through walls. Maybe we should give him signature weapon walls. Despite his raw fighting skills and his obvious strength, Frank Castle is rarely going to use a knife or a fist when he's got access to a gun. So I don't think we need to burn through our thematic bonus just to dabble in the melee weapon or martial arts power sets. What we can do is make sure that we represent his raw fighting skills with a high melee ability score. Not like Shang-Chi high, but high enough to represent the wide variety of fighting techniques he uses when guns aren't available. Now, there are other powers that Frank could have, but I think these are the only ones we need to give him, so let's convert the remaining slots to ability scores for now. We can always come back if we feel as though we've missed something crucial to my design concept. Looking at ability scores, for me the place to start is with resilience. The Punisher is the toughest regular unpowered human in Marvel. Period. In this run, the guy lets himself get caught, interrogated, and beat up for a while by a group of toughs, and then he shrugs it off like it was nothing. The guy gets shot, he gets dropped from extreme heights, gets his eye gouged out, but nothing gets in his way. He just keeps going like the Terminator. In my mind, he needs to have the highest resilience possible for a regular human, so I'm giving him a 6. I'm going to give him an agility of 5 to represent his shooting and his knife throwing skills, and at least a melee of 4 to cover his hand-to-hand and his knife fighting prowess. That leaves us 3 points to play with. His vigilance needs to be good, but luckily we've got combat ready, so that helps us get that focus up, because Orchestra of Overkill is not cheap. It takes 15 points of focus to use. Are we missing anything else? We could knock his ego down to -1 to reflect his sort of single-minded mission and utter disregard for anything or anyone that gets in his way. Frank notoriously does not play well with others, and it could be fun to reflect that in his stats. Well, let's think about our options. What would we do if we knocked that ego down to -1? How would we use that extra point? If you take a look at his wiki or at fandom.com, you can see that he's got piloting skills, but that's something that doesn't come up in this particular run, so I don't think we need it. Similarly, we could take Iron Will because it mentions here that he's got a resistance to telepathic powers, but again, that's not something that comes up in these stories. Sniping is another option, but in these stories, he likes to get in close. If anything, it's his temporary partner, Sergeant Rachel Cole-Alves, who seems to excel at sniping in the Rucka run of the comics. So I don't think we need to add any more powers or traits here. We could raise his melee to 5 to represent, as we talked about, his brute strength and his killing instincts. It would be rare to have a character with a melee score that high, but not have any melee or martial arts skills, but I kind of like that. It's thematic and unique and helping me think about how I would roleplay Frank in combat. So yeah, let's do it. Let's knock that ego down to -1 and boost his melee to 5. Bellissimo. Which way would you go? Let me know in the comments. Would you give him the point of melee, or would you give him a different power like accuracy 3, or a trait like fearless? There are many correct ways to build a character. Choices like this are hard, but fun to make, especially if the research that you need to do is just rereading some of your favorite comic books. I want to end by giving a big shout out to everyone that requested this video, either here on YouTube or on Facebook. Leave a comment if you got any other questions or requests for videos, and even if you don't, leave a like or a comment for the algorithm. It really helps these videos reach more people. As always, I truly appreciate your support. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Have a great day.